welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Aasma Shaukat. She's a gastroenterologist and she wrote the Kevin MD article, Be an Upstander and Not a Bystander. Aasma, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm like many other people in your audience. I grew up in Pakistan and moved to the US after medical school and did my postgrad training here and also postgrad residency, followed by fellowship. And I have master's in epidemiology and biostatistics. And then I joined the faculty and rose through the ranks of academic life. And I am a professor of medicine and I do research in colon cancer. And I've lived in multiple different cities and pretty much been here for the last 20 years and really feel like I'm a fabric of our landscape. I'm married and I have 3 young children and I have a pretty well settled life.
Excellent. And how is the pandemic affecting you professionally and you personally?
The pandemic has been a challenge. We are considered healthcare workers and pretty much first line. And a lot of our work is outpatient endoscopy, which has been very, very slow or static. But it's brought challenges of telemedicine as well as trying to get care to the ones that need it the most. And these would be individuals that are disadvantaged, where they don't have great internet connections to do telehealth with, or they have other issues such as hearing or visual impairments, or they really need to be seen in person. So it's been a challenge, but we've been lucky. Our hospitals had enough PPE, and we've slowly ramped up things. So people that were overdue for different clinical work, we've started to bring them in, and we'll be at 100% capacity next month.
Excellent. So let's talk about your Kevin MD article, Be an Upstander and Not a Bystander. Now, for those who haven't read your article, can you walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Absolutely. So over the 20 years that I've practiced medicine in this country, there have been different isolated incidences where you come across either colleagues or patients that make certain remarks that are inappropriate. And by and large, you learn to just ignore them and move on. But in the last few years, it's become a lot more systematic and a lot more frequent, where it's becoming harder and harder to ignore these. Particularly, we're exposed to all kinds of patients and we want to help them. So we have a very high level of tolerance, but at some point it does make you wonder that how long will it take for you to feel like you're completely assimilated and as credible or as accepted as your white colleagues or people that were born and grew up in this country. One particular incident really struck a chord with me. And that's when I decided, enough is enough. We should write these stories because it's not the one and only story for me. And it's certainly not, I'm not the only one that this happens to. And it's about time that we start bringing attention to issues such as this, where everybody that doesn't look or speak a certain way just doesn't look like they fit in, but then they're made to feel bad about it. And that's where the problem comes. We should celebrate diversity, and we should obviously not pretend to be something we're not, but we should also not put people down just because of the color of their skin or how they look or their religion, their race, their sex, and a multitude of other factors. And there's been a movement abound in this country, and truly I feel like it's at the heels of this. We in the healthcare workforce are pretty much the first line and exposed to a lot of this. And a lot of comments I decided to ignore, but this one I decided not to. So the story goes like this. I do a lot of endoscopy in my profession, and this is outpatient elective endoscopy. And I walk into a procedure room and the patient is ready to be consented. And this is a gentleman in his 60s. He's white. He's from St. Cloud, which is a smaller city in Minnesota. And he's here for an endoscopy. And I greet him just like I greet every other patient. Hello, sir. My name is Dr. Shaukat. We'll be doing your endoscopy today. How are you doing? And then I go through the whole consent process, which is pretty standard for us. There are 4 other people in the room with me.
Mm-hmm.
And at this time, everybody's paying attention to the consent process. So there is a nurse, a tech, and another tech in the room. And they're all listening to this conversation. And I finish my consent and I ask, do you have any questions for me? And out of the blue, the patient says, where's your burka? For the audience, a burka is a complete covering that highly conservative Muslim women wear. And that took me aback. I thought I misheard. So I said, excuse me, can you repeat that?
Mm-hmm.
Where's your burka? I said, and then I was completely floored and taken aback because I didn't know where this question came from. I said, why would I have a burka? Don't women like you, he said, pointing to my face, don't women like you from your part of the world wear burqas? And shouldn't they be staying at home? And that, again, felt extremely inappropriate. And it was clearly meant to be an insult or put me down for unclear reasons. Our healthcare system also doesn't prepare us how to respond to these questions. So I felt very embarrassed and very uncomfortable, particularly because there were 3 other people watching me. So I said, well, we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about you and your procedure. Any questions about the procedure? No. And then we proceeded to finish the procedure. And it really shook me that I was really put in my place, so to speak, and really felt like an outsider. And what bothered me, I've worked in this same endoscopy center for 14 years, pretty much after I finished my fellowship training. And, these are individuals that literally have known me for that long.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody either spoke up during this conversation. An appropriate response may have been, sir, that's not a nice thing to say, or that's not an appropriate thing to say to our provider. And then even afterwards, it would have meant a world to me if somebody had come up to me and said, we saw that exchange and we were just as speechless, and I'm really sorry, but that shouldn't have happened, or something along those lines. So it was a mixture of embarrassment, feeling very betrayed, and just feeling I didn't fit in. And it kind of burst my bubble of feeling that here I am feeling that I've contributed meaningfully to this society. I've been a citizen for over 20 years. My husband is white. My children are biracial. And I live in a nice suburb with a great neighborhood. But here, somebody just put me in my place in a few seconds. And that's not the only time. There's a lot of other instances where this continues to happen. And that's truly when I decided to write about it instead of doing what I usually do, which is just keep quiet, be embarrassed about it, and move on, hoping that it doesn't happen the next time around.
Now, after reflecting on this, did you talk to anyone in administration perhaps about these incidents?
Yes, I brought it up to our nurse manager and our leader of our section, and they were very sympathetic. And they said, this kind of stuff should not be happening. And what can we do? We should brainstorm together to educate our staff, maybe even educate our patients, and send the message loud and clear that we support all our healthcare workers, no matter what they look like or how they speak or their race, religion, or sexual orientation. So we should send that message loud and clear. And what else can we do? And that got me thinking about strategies that we could improve this situation. Some of the things that came to mind are that we need to start early. This needs to be part of the curriculum in high school, in college, in medical school, nursing school, tech school. And then we need to craft these training programs for all of our staff on implicit bias, diversity, and also standing up when you see something. Things like when you see something, say something. Along the same lines, this should be really formally taught and propagated. And then I would even venture as far as saying it's not okay just because our patients are vulnerable and they need the help, but there need to be certain boundaries put in. Mm-hmm. So I know certain hospitals have taken on policies such as putting up posters throughout the hospital saying racial intolerance is not encouraged here or tolerated here, or checking patients, whether they're inpatients or outpatients, if they say something downright insulting or extremely rude, extremely sexist, misogynist, or anything that makes an employee feel disenfranchised.
You mentioned this earlier. So let's say you observe the interaction of racial intolerance between a healthcare worker and a patient. Now, just to be clear, what should these colleagues be saying or doing?
Right. So the first thing is to check the person who's making those comments. And that sometimes is enough to send a message and stop that behavior. And this is something that I'm starting to do more and more because as I round with, say, residents or trainees, sometimes I see remarks made to them from hostile patients or colleagues. The first thing to say is, that's not appropriate, or that wasn't funny, or did you really mean to say that? Could you please not say things like that? So the first thing is to just check them right in their place. And I feel being an observer puts you in a position to be able to do that rather than the interaction. It really helps the person that's at the receiving end of those things. And that sometimes is enough. But we all just need to speak up for each other. And we just need to be upstanders for each other and set examples so that that behavior gets checked and hopefully doesn't get repeated.
And of course, my next question is, so what if you are the recipient of inappropriate remarks from patients, especially if you're an intern, resident, or medical student, or maybe even a junior attending? Sometimes it's hard to speak up, especially if there are more senior clinicians in the room. So what kind of advice can you give them?
Is absolutely bring it up to leadership. Often, and I've been guilty of this for many years, is we get embarrassed. We feel we might be thought to be the root cause. Something we said we might have provoked such behavior, and there's just a lot of stigma in reporting these kinds of incidences. I think we need to be very vocal and go to our leadership and say, this is what happened, and I would like for you to tell me how this would be remedied, and hopefully provide reassurance and also some concrete steps of how to not just mitigate this, but prevent it from happening in the future. So I would say be very vocal about it.
And at that moment, that clinician is the recipient of inappropriate remarks. Should the patient be checked at that moment, or should they wait and then report it later to leadership?
It might depend a bit on the circumstance, but if this is an outpatient encounter and you can pretty much tell what is behind the motivation for this, I think the patient should be checked right there and then. Sir, what you said was very inappropriate, or ma'am, that was a very inappropriate remark, whether it's directed towards you or they're talking about a colleague of yours or a whole race category or somebody else in general. That was a very inappropriate remark, or that was a very racist remark. I just wanted to let you know that such remarks aren't tolerated in this facility. And please, let's just talk about your medical issues. And that's not a conversation I wish to have.
We're talking to Aasma Shaukat. She's a gastroenterologist, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, Be an Upstander and Not a Bystander. Ever since you told your story, what has the response been?
Overwhelmingly positive. All my colleagues have read the post, and thanks to its wide circulation and its reach, a lot of people have come across it. And the response has been, we had no idea this happens, or I feel really bad. I will always stand up for you, or thank you so much for reminding us to stand up for each other because it looks like we just don't do it often enough. So I think that was a very, very positive response. Also, I got responses from younger trainees and students that say, thank you so much. We feel we don't feel empowered enough to bring this to attention because we're so low on the totem pole of hierarchy that it's good to know that these things can be brought to light because we have similar experiences. A lot of individuals reached out with similar experiences they've had, where they've had remarks, oh yes, I had something similar happen to me. And there's a lot of remarks out there. But then there have also been a couple of individuals that wrote to me and actually tried to defend that behavior and said, oh, the patient might have just been curious. You misunderstood, you misinterpreted. He might have just been curious where you were from. Or maybe he was just nervous and trying to make light of the situation. And that bothered me a little bit. Being right there and being in this profession for 20 years, I think I'm a pretty good judge of when somebody has good intention and truly is curious versus when somebody's truly saying things to put you down. Fortunately, that was a minority of the reaction,
Mhm.
but there are people willing to defend and stand up for this. Ignoring that, everybody else was overwhelmingly positive. And I think these are stories we need to get out there so we can truly start changing the narrative and changing the culture around this.
And my final question, do you have a take-home message that you want to share with the Kevin MD audience?
My message is for every immigrant, any person that doesn't fit the standard mold of a place where they work or live, if you see something and it doesn't sit right with you, speak up, say something, either challenge it right there and then or bring it up later. But don't sit with it because you know what? Then that behavior just gets perpetuated. Also, there's a lot of support out there, but unless we get our message out, we can't really solicit that support and that help. And I'm very encouraged that this is what will cause the cultural change.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story insight, and thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.